G'day there, mate. It's your boy, I Read Reddit, back at it again with some more Entitled Parent stories. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride, fellas and Sheilas. This is the best episode of r/slash Entitled Parents on YouTube. Our first story comes from user NannyLynn62, titled, Stop Sending Your Kid Over. I am not a babysitter. At first I wasn't sure if this was an Entitled Parent story, because I think this woman is just plain crazy. But after reading a few of these, I've figured out that crazy and entitled are one and the same. Years ago, this neighbour of mine, she'd recently moved to a house on the next street over, kept trying for the better part of a summer to use me as a free babysitter. It started when her kid, who was a really cute, well-behaved kid about 7 years old, showed up at my door at about 7:15 in the morning. We were all just waking up and getting around, so I told him that my boys weren't ready to play yet and to come back in a few hours. That is when this kid told me that his mum had gone to work. This seemed a bit odd to me, so I brought him in and tried to call his mum. This was the time of only landlines, so sure enough she was gone. So I brought him in and fed him breakfast. He stayed with us for the rest of the day, and he got along well with my two boys who were 5 and 10. I had only talked to his mum about 2 times, so I had no idea why she would think this was a good idea. When his mum came home, I walked him over so I could talk to her. I told her not to do that again. I told her that I would be willing to watch him on occasion, if asked first, but not every day. Her response was, "Well, what else do you have to do all day?" This kinda took me by surprise. I tried to tell her that I work at home on commissions. She rolled her eyes and told me that being an artist isn't a real job. And besides, I was married, so I didn't need to work. I should have pointed out to her that she was married and working, but I felt myself getting angry and I didn't want to argue with her. "Just don't do that again," is what I said to her. "You have teenage kids home for the summer, have them babysit." She then frowned at me and said, "They work." I said, "So do I." Then I went home. The next morning, at 7:15, the kid sheepishly shows up again. Once again I bring him in and feed him breakfast and later lunch. Once again, I took him to his home, and once again told his mother to please not do that again. She actually tried to tell me that it was my neighborly duty to watch him, and I told her that if she sent him tomorrow, I wouldn't be there because of a doctor's appointment. She said that as a babysitter, I should have given her several days' notice about this. I angrily told her that I was not a babysitter, and then went home. The next morning, I made my 7 a.m. appointment. Blood work, that's why this was so early. I did some grocery shopping afterwards, and it was about 10 a.m. When I got home, the poor kid was waiting for me on my porch. He had been there for nearly 3 hours, and the little guy was scared and hungry. That night, when I took the kid home, I was angry. I told her how the kid was scared and alone. She actually said that she had told me I hadn't given her enough time to find anyone else, and that his being alone was my fault. I pointed at her and said, "I am not a babysitter. Don't send him over again." That night, this woman had her adult nephew call me to scream at me for not being home when his poor auntie dropped her son off. How dare I leave a small child alone like that? I told the nephew that his auntie knew that I wasn't home, so it was her that left the child all alone. I said that I had repeatedly asked the auntie to not send the kid over anymore, and I was not a babysitter. This nephew freaked out at me when I said that, and I hung up on his screaming at me. This worked for 2 wonderful, quiet days. Then, right back to it. I tried everything, but this woman insisted that it was my neighborly duty to babysit and would tell me as such. Finally, I decided that to solve this problem, I would just get a job outside of my home, and that way she would have to stop. I was too much of a pacifist back then. Currently, I'm no longer like that. I landed an interview for a position at the local library, and I was ecstatic. I told the woman to keep her son home because I'd arranged for my kids to stay with their grandmother while I went for this interview. The next morning, I drove to my mother-in-law's and took my kids inside. When I went to leave, I found this woman's kid waiting for me in my car. She had actually followed me there and put her son in my unlocked car, then zoomed off while I was dropping off my boys. My mother-in-law wasn't the most flexible person in the world, and she adamantly refused to watch an extra kid, so I had to cancel my interview. I was livid. I toyed with several ideas at this moment. I could take the kid to her job and leave him with her, or I could call the police and the Child Protective Services. I really wasn't sure how stable this woman's job was, and I didn't want her to get fired. And when I went to go call the Child Protective Services, I chickened out because it really wouldn't be fair to the little boy. Besides, I had heard really scary stories about the CPS. In the end, I just waited for her to come home. I left the boy at my house with my hubby. I planned on doing a lot of cussing. And I stomped over to her house and met her before she even got out of her car. I shouted at her. I told her that she was dense, stupid, moronic, and crazy. I told her that she had lost me my job interview, and if she ever sent her kid over to be watched again, I was going to call the Child Protective Services and then the police. I told her that she was violating my space, and if it took going to court to get her to knock it off, then so be it. She then put her hand on her hip, and in a most snotty tone she said, "Well, if you don't want to sit with him, all you had to do was tell me." I really don't know how I kept from punching her right then and there. This comment was so asinine. I turned on my heels to start stomping home when I saw her husband pulling up. Now, this was the first time I'd ever met her husband. He worked at a job that only allowed him to be home on weekends. And I can't blame him. I wouldn't want to be around her either. But when she saw him, she turned tail and ran into her house. He saw that I was upset and asked me what had happened. I told him all of it, especially the incident at my mother-in-law's house. The poor man was shocked. He had been told that I was being paid, and he'd been giving her money to pay me. He had no idea all this had been going on, and he was very, very apologetic over the whole thing. In fact, he apologized again to my husband when he came over to pick up his little boy. Finally, she stopped sending her kid over. Later, I heard from others that she was bad-mouthing me and warning folks about what a horrid babysitter I was. But I took that as a favor. I didn't want to babysit any kids other than my own, and I still hate doing so. I don't hate the kids, I do love kids. It's dealing with the parents that I don't like. The kid came over only once in a while after that to play with my kids. After, he had to call first to get permission, exactly the way that it should be done anyway. I'm sure his dad had something to do with that because the kid only came over on weekends. This is one of the few stories I have involving this crazy lady. Her only entertainment in life seems to be how bizarre she can act in this neighborhood. I'm luckier than my other neighbors in the fact that she leaves me alone now, and I'm very, very happy with that. Our next story is also by NannyLynn62, titled, "My Kids Can Come Into Your House Whenever They Want." So, my husband and I bought our house back in the 70s. To call it a fixer-upper would be kind. It had been on the market for over a year, and we were the first to even look at it closer than a drive-by. But by the end of the year of living here, we'd done a ton of work and the place was starting to look great. Even the neighbors commented on how great the house and yard looked. Yay! New siding and grass seed does wonders. One summer day, I was hanging my laundry out when I noticed my neighbor's granddaughter and grandson run across my yard into my house. I had never had those kids in my house before, so I was shocked as to why they would just do that. I quickly went in after them. The little boy, I think, was about 4, just a little guy following his sister around. The sister looked to be about maybe 6 or 7 years old, and she told me that she had permission to be in my house. I asked her who gave her permission, and she said that her mom told her she could. I got the kids to follow me and I took them to their grandparents' house. Their grandmother and mother were on the porch, so I told the women what had happened. The kids' mother confirmed that she had indeed given both children permission to explore my house. I stuttered a moment while asking why. She said, "You bought that house out from under me. We're the ones that should be living there. These kids are sad, they don't get to live across the street from their grandparents, and since they should have been living there, I told them they could go in." I looked at the kids. They were pushing and poking each other and giggling. They didn't really seem all that upset to me. I said, "That house was on the market for 14 months, and I've lived here longer than a year. Why are you unhappy about this now?" At this, the woman's mother, who was my neighbor, chimed in saying, "Oh, she was getting ready to ask about the house when you bought it. Oh, it wasn't all that fair of you. You stepped in and now my daughter and my grandkids can't live near me. They have more of a right than you to be there. I seriously didn't know what to say. I know for a fact that no one else had looked into the purchase of this house until my husband and I bought it. I looked at both women standing in front of me, frowning with their arms crossed, looking defiant, and decided that I didn't really want to engage this kind of goofiness. I asked the mother to please keep her kids out of my house, and then I left. I walked home to the sound of them loudly yapping their displeasure behind me. This is one of the most unreasonable situations that I had ever been in, and I've been in a few. These women's made our lives miserable for a while. Every week we had city inspectors dropping in because of anonymous complaints of unauthorized construction. We were building on a couple of rooms, but we had permits for everything. We began keeping the permits in a folder by the door because we had to show them all the time. I think nowadays you have to display it on the wall where everyone can see. 2 different times police pounded on our door late at night because one of our neighbors heard screaming and had called them. There was no screaming, we had been asleep both times. I had to carry my keys on me at all times because when I went outside, if I left the doors unlocked, those 2 kids would be right in there. They managed to come in several more times that summer, and it was difficult getting them out. It was starting to turn into a nightmare. Just as I was looking into my legal options for getting them to stop, the older couple, the grandparents of the kids who had kept coming into my house, moved to a farm that they had inherited. They sold their house, and our next new neighbors were great people. In fact, they're still there. The hassles had only lasted a few months, but man, it was intense for a while. Then I found out that they had known that they were going to move all along. Those 2 had been bored one day and just decided to hassle me because I was new, and they'd already hassled everyone else in the neighborhood. The sale of the house was the only thing they could come up with to have against me. I also found out that our neighborhood was glad to see them go. Now, before I get reprimanded for not calling the police, believe me when I say that back then you did not want police involved. The police we had in this city during this time were all in a state of perpetual anger, and they would make a reason to arrest you if you even looked at them wrong. I freaked out in a major way when they showed up in the night. Also, if I had called the police on the trespassing kids, the harassment I was experiencing would have been stepped up. And yes, I was a ginormous wimp. Those 2 lovely gals had been known to physically attack people, and they were lots bigger than me. There have been hassles with neighbors since then, but none of them as awful as this was. Like my husband says, just be glad they didn't give their house to their mean daughter with trespassing kids. I think I would have moved if that had happened. Our next story is by user Spartan with a Gun, titled, "Please learn the rules of the gun range before going to one." This happened last week, so I'm trying to wrap my head around it still. Firstly, I love guns, nearly everything about them. The sound, ka-chow, the recoil, bwiow, the fireball, poof. What I don't like is when an idiot is given one. When idiots have guns, people get killed. Wah wah. So when I see an entitled parent and her 9-year-old son at a gun range, I was initially happy that this kid was being taught at a young age. I go to my bay, right next to the entitled parent and the son, who was actually quite nice. When I see the entitled parent's handgun pointed at me, so I jump out of the way of the barrel and tell her to keep it down range. She scoffs at me and pulls the, "Oh, it's not loaded," BS, to which I reply that I don't care. Always treat it like it is loaded. I had 2 guns with me, my Springfield XD40 subcompact handgun and my AR-15. Now continuing the story. You should know who this is in terms of abbreviations. The kid goes up to the chute and he starts firing. When he's done, he sets the gun down so that it points at me. Being a kid and probably new, I tell him to always keep it down range for safety. He acknowledges this and points the gun back. When I feel a firm smack to the back of my head,
"Hey, don't you talk to my son like that."
"Hey, I'm just trying to teach him gun safety. If anybody gets shot at one of these ranges, the place can get shut down."
"Don't you talk back to me."
She moves to hit me again, to which I hover my hand over my XD40, which was resting on the table. That sends her enough signal to back off. When she goes up to shoot, she pulls the trigger, to which nothing happens. She points the gun at me again. To which, this time, I yell at her to keep it downrange, and she decides to ignore me. I say, "Ma'am, if the gun misfires, keep it downrange because it may have been a delayed firing." "Shut up, jerk!" I go back to shooting my handgun, to which I see once again that the gun is pointed at me. And the worst part? She was fiddling with the goddamn trigger! To those who don't know, the rule is that you can point your gun at somebody if you feel they are genuinely jeopardizing your life. I wasn't quite there yet, so I called over range safety. Range safety told her off, and she listened. Until she did the same damn thing again. Now I point my gun at her, because we're having an old-fashioned shoot-off. She says to me, "What the fudge are you doing?" And I say, "Keep your gun down range." The range safety officer comes over to calm me down, and he takes the gun from the entitled parent. Then the entitled parent tries to throttle the range safety. So I take the gun from him and field strip it, disassemble in case of emergency. I noticed the safety was on, but the gun was fully loaded. So I point my gun at the entitled parent and tell her to get on her knees with her hands behind her head. And she goes,
"I'll sue you for this kind of bullcrap."
And I say to the little kid, "Never say anything you've heard today until you're older, alright?" Back to the entitled parent I say, "Go ahead, I'll just show you that camera footage then, eh?" The range safety calls the cops, and when they arrive, I field strip both my guns. I get cuffed, asked a few questions, and then released to put my guns in their cases. The entitled parent is screaming bloody murder as she's taken away, and the kid is just crying. So then I go to the kid and try to calm him down. The entitled parent then screams that I'm trying to kidnap her son. I just back away and the kid is calmed down and just put my hands up. Cops close the car door and then they get contacts for the kid's dad. Still waiting for a court date. I will update you when I do get one. And our last story is posted by user CarelessCrab, titled, "Make the Nazis less horrible for my daughter!" You know the deal. Not my first language, I'm on mobile, sorry in advance. So this is a short one. I'm from Germany and we have some NS museums in different places to remind us of the horror and inform visitors of what happened in the specific area of Germany they're visiting. I was visiting one when I heard a child cry. Not a baby that didn't know better, but a toddler. Sounded genuinely upset. Enter entitled mother. I hear her loudly complain about a video and how this isn't child friendly at all. Now, first of all, in these museums, it's fudging quiet. Second of all, they're not supposed to be child friendly. They show raw, horrible pictures that show a brutal truth, and most adults are left speechless. It can turn and churn your stomach sometimes. The employee says to her, "I'm really sorry it upsets her. This museum is suggested for ages 14 and up though." Entitled mother spouts back, "How is she supposed to learn?" Now that kid was 3 years old max? You can maybe talk to them about it, but these museums are clearly not for kids. It even says so on the website. Now, I'm already invested in this when my mum goes on about how they should have censored that. I turn around to see what they were talking about and my heart sinks. It's a video of piles of dead, starved bodies that they found in concentration camps. It's a horrifying thing to look at, and this lady complained about some stuff being shown. I'm pretty sure the kid is crying about the overall visual and not some stuff they saw on screen. The employee looked shocked and she's clearly never heard that complaint before. She confusedly offered to refund their tickets and the lady angrily agreed. Some people. Hey there guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think of it in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to see some of my latest content, smash that big old box in the middle and subscribe for more background noise. Also, check out my new channel called Cobber, link in the description and in that card at the top right of the screen. With that said, this has been I Read Reddit and I'm signing off today. Hooroo mate.